The most dangerous breakup isn't the one that happens suddenly. It's the one that happens quietly, while you're still together. She didn't leave you. She just stopped choosing you, slowly, day by day. Welcome to Female Nature Revealed, where we uncover the hidden psychological truths behind modern dating dynamics and complex human relationship behaviors. Sometimes people do not actually leave a relationship when they lose interest, but they simply stop investing any real effort. They still send you text messages every morning, and they still show up to keep the casual conversations going smoothly. However, deep down, something feels incredibly uncertain, and you begin to wonder if their feelings are truly genuine or fading. If you listen very closely, you can hear this emotional distance directly in the specific way they speak to you. This video is not about overanalyzing every single word they say during a normal, casual conversation on a daily basis. Instead, it is about recognizing clear patterns of low emotional investment before they inevitably become painful and devastating final outcomes. We will explore the subtle signs of emotional withdrawal through the beautiful and expressive lens of modern cinematic anime style. By understanding these subtle conversational cues, you can protect your own heart and make much better choices in your relationships. Let us dive deep into the fascinating psychology behind why people use vague language when their romantic interest slowly fades. Pay close attention, because these subtle verbal patterns might just save you from experiencing a lot of unnecessary emotional pain. To truly understand these subtle behaviors, we must first build a solid foundation based on human psychology and evolutionary context. Human beings are naturally wired to constantly seek the absolute best available options when it comes to long-term partnerships. We also have a strong, instinctive drive to avoid premature commitment when we feel unsure about our current romantic situation. This evolutionary instinct helps individuals preserve their personal flexibility and freedom, especially when facing high levels of uncertainty and doubt. Because direct rejection feels incredibly uncomfortable and socially risky, people often choose to communicate their fading interest in indirect ways. When romantic interest is extremely high and genuine, a person will always make their communication incredibly clear and perfectly direct. Conversely, when their internal interest is low or highly uncertain, their daily communication naturally becomes incredibly vague and highly confusing. This vague communication acts as a protective shield, allowing them to slowly step back without causing an immediate dramatic conflict. Recognizing this evolutionary defense mechanism is the first crucial step toward understanding why your partner might be acting so distant. You must learn to see past their soft words and recognize the underlying biological drive to maintain their personal options. Now let us examine the 7 specific phrases that clearly indicate someone is slowly pulling away from your romantic connection. The first major group of phrases completely revolves around the psychological concept of actively avoiding any form of serious commitment. If she says she is not ready for a relationship right now, you need to listen to that underlying message. While this phrase sounds like a simple issue of bad timing, it actually reflects her current level of romantic interest. Psychologically speaking, this common statement allows her to completely avoid giving you a direct and potentially hurtful romantic rejection today. It also strategically keeps her future options wide open, just in case she changes her mind about you later on. Remember that conversational ambiguity often protects a person's optionality, allowing them to safely navigate complex social situations without making promises. When someone is truly excited about building a future with you, they will never let minor timing issues stop them. They will eagerly lock down the commitment because the intense fear of losing you outweighs any fear of being trapped. Therefore, accepting this vague excuse only prolongs your own emotional suffering while giving her the freedom to explore other options. Another classic phrase in this commitment avoidance category is when she casually suggests that you should just go with the flow. This phrase completely removes all structural boundaries and effectively eliminates any clear direction from your developing romantic relationship right now. The psychological effect of this dynamic is that one person gets to completely define the overall pace of the connection. Meanwhile, the other person is forced to constantly adapt and wait anxiously for any tiny scraps of affection or clarity. Without mutual clarity and shared relationship goals, the entire romantic dynamic quickly becomes incredibly one-sided and emotionally draining today. Going with the flow usually means floating entirely on her terms, while your own emotional needs are completely ignored forever. Healthy relationships require active participation and mutual effort, rather than a passive approach that avoids taking any real personal responsibility. If you find yourself constantly drifting without a clear destination, it is absolutely time to grab the steering wheel yourself. You deserve a partner who actively rows the boat with you, instead of just passively floating along as a passenger. The second group of phrases involves deflecting personal responsibility and shifting the emotional blame entirely onto other people or situations. If she constantly claims that all of her previous partners were toxic, you should consider this a massive red flag. This consistent pattern of external blame serves as a very clear signal of her dangerously low capacity for self-reflection. It is statistically improbable that every single person from her past was entirely at fault for their failed romantic connections. Deep psychological insight tells us that behavioral patterns that are never honestly examined are almost always repeated in future relationships. By playing the eternal victim, she completely avoids taking any accountability for her own toxic contributions to those past breakups. You will eventually become the next toxic ex in her narrative when your relationship inevitably reaches its painful final conclusion. A healthy partner must possess the emotional maturity to recognize their own personal flaws and actively work on improving themselves. Do not fall into the trap of believing you are the magical savior who will finally treat her right today. Another dangerous phrase in this category is when she tells you that you are simply overthinking or being too sensitive. This is a classic manipulation tactic designed to completely dismiss your valid perception of the reality occurring within the relationship. Psychologically, this effectively reduces her personal accountability and immediately shifts the focus completely away from her own questionable problematic behavior. When your personal reality is constantly minimized by someone you love, you slowly begin to question your own mental sanity. You start doubting your own valid feelings instead of rightfully questioning the toxic situation that is causing your emotional distress. This form of emotional invalidation destroys trust and creates a deeply unhealthy power dynamic where her reality always reigns supreme. A truly loving partner will always listen to your concerns with empathy instead of instantly dismissing them as foolish overreactions. Never allow anyone to convince you that your natural intuition and genuine emotional responses are somehow fundamentally wrong or crazy. Trust your gut instincts because they are usually picking up on subtle behavioral cues that your conscious mind completely missed. The third group of phrases clearly indicates a severely limited future investment in the ongoing romantic connection you currently share. When she bluntly states that she cannot promise anything, she might be honest, but she is also being incredibly limiting. This straightforward statement serves as a massive warning signal of her extremely low desire for any long-term romantic commitment. People who are genuinely excited about building a life with you do not ever hesitate to include you in tomorrow. They actively make solid plans and eagerly look forward to sharing their future milestones and daily experiences with you forever. By refusing to make even small promises, she is deliberately keeping one foot completely out the door of the relationship. She wants to enjoy all the current benefits of your companionship without carrying any of the heavy responsibilities of commitment. You cannot build a stable house on a foundation of uncertainty, and you cannot build a relationship without future promises. Walk away from anyone who treats your shared future as a heavy burden rather than a beautiful and exciting privilege. Another common phrase indicating limited future investment is when she says she just wants to focus entirely on herself currently. This is a clever framing technique that uses the noble concept of personal growth to mask her true underlying intentions. What this phrase almost always means in reality is that building a romantic relationship with you is simply not prioritized. From a biological and evolutionary angle, human beings naturally allocate their limited energy toward the highest perceived return on investment. If she is not investing her time and energy into you, it simply means she values other pursuits much higher. Remember the golden rule of relationships, that a person's daily attention reveals their true priorities much more than words do. You should never have to constantly beg someone to make a tiny bit of space for you in their life. True partnership naturally involves balancing personal growth with the beautiful shared journey of building a meaningful life together every day. If she truly wants to fly completely solo, you must absolutely respect her choice and let her walk away today. The final major group focuses entirely on a strong internal resistance to adding any real emotional depth to the connection. When she warns you not to ruin things by making the relationship serious, she is actively avoiding any natural progression. This is a massive, glaring signal indicating her strong preference for a highly superficial and extremely low responsibility romantic connection. When natural relationship progression and emotional seriousness feel like an unbearable pressure, it usually means the underlying foundation is weak. A healthy romantic connection naturally deepens over time, as both partners slowly reveal their true selves and build mutual trust. If she actively resists this beautiful natural evolution, she is trying to keep you trapped in a shallow emotional puddle. You deserve an ocean of profound emotional depth, not a tiny shallow pool where you must constantly restrict your feelings. Trying to force a deeper connection with someone who actively fears intimacy will only leave you feeling exhausted and empty. Recognize this phrase for exactly what it is, which is a massive stop sign preventing any further meaningful emotional travel. Now that we have identified these 7 toxic phrases, we must elevate our understanding of why this phenomenon actually happens. Human beings are constantly trying to effectively manage high levels of social uncertainty while evaluating every single new romantic opportunity. We also possess a deeply ingrained psychological need to carefully manage and minimize our personal exposure to devastating emotional risks. So instead of providing absolute clarity, which requires immense vulnerability, people instinctively choose to use incredibly soft and vague language. They rely heavily on indirect behavioral signals to slowly communicate their fading romantic interest without triggering an explosive emotional confrontation. This complex behavior has a very strong evolutionary tie in that perfectly explains modern human dating dynamics in today's world. Keeping romantic options completely open was historically highly advantageous for human survival and reproductive success in ancient hunter-gatherer societies. That ancient primal instinct still strongly manifests itself in our modern relationships through these confusing and highly ambiguous conversational patterns. Understanding this biological reality helps remove the intense personal sting of rejection when someone slowly begins to pull away emotionally. It is rarely a direct reflection of your inherent personal value, but rather a manifestation of their own evolutionary programming. However, just because a specific behavior is evolutionary, natural, does not mean you have to tolerate it in your life. Moving forward, we must discuss exactly what you should do when you finally recognize these toxic patterns in your relationship. First and foremost, you must completely stop trying to obsessively decode every single vague sentence your romantic partner ever speaks. Instead of analyzing their confusing words, you must take a step back and carefully observe the overall consistency of behavior. Always look for a perfect alignment between the pretty words they speak and the actual concrete actions they consistently take. You must learn to easily distinguish between a clear forward direction and a state of prolonged, agonizing, emotional, romantic ambiguity. The core guiding principle you must always remember is that absolute clarity naturally builds a deeply secure and loving connection. On the other hand, constant behavioral confusion always serves as a glaring signal of fundamental romantic misalignment and emotional distance. When someone truly values your presence in their life, they will never intentionally leave you confused about where you stand. They will actively work to eliminate any lingering doubts because your emotional security is incredibly important to their own happiness. If you find yourself constantly confused by her mixed signals, it is time to accept that confusion is an answer. Stop waiting for a magical translation of her vague words, and start making bold decisions based on her concrete actions. Ultimately, you do not ever need to desperately convince someone to invest their precious time and emotional energy into you. You simply need to develop the wisdom to recognize exactly when they are clearly choosing not to make that investment. True self-respect is never about desperately trying to prove your incredible personal value to someone who remains entirely blind. It is actually about quickly recognizing exactly where your immense personal value is simply not being met or properly appreciated. Listen to what people say, but pay even closer attention to what they consistently show you on Female Nature Revealed. Please like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next videos. Goodbye.